On the 16th of June each year, we celebrate Youth Day in South Africa. What is this all about? To start with, let's think about two human rights that we all have, which are helpful in understanding Youth Day. Firstly, the human right that everyone is born free and equal. That means that no matter your gender, where you were born, what skin colour you are free to make choices and you are equal. No one is more important than anyone else. Secondly, the right to education. Everyone has the right to free primary school education and then to have access to continue their studies as far as they wish. Now, let me take you back in time to June 1976 in South Africa. That might seem like a very long time ago, but it's actually less than 50 years ago. It was during the time of apartheid in South Africa. This was a system whereby people were treated differently because of their race. Everyone was classified by their skin colour into one of four groups: white, black, Indian or coloured, and then were referred to as white or non-whites. The government was white, and they did not treat non-whites as equals and treated them unfairly. They were not allowed to vote for leaders, and so they had no power to change the situation. Under apartheid, Hendrik Verwoerd led putting together the Bantu Education Act, which later became the Black Education Act. The purpose of the Bantu Education Act was to make sure that black children did not get the same level of education as white children, and that black people were not so well educated and so could only work in basic jobs. Here are some ways that the Bantu education system was unfair. The government was spending far more on white education than on black education. The government spent 644 rand each year for each white student, but only 42 rand a year for a black school child. There were not enough school places for the black students. In 1976, there was space for about 1 in every 7 children to go to school. As a result, the schools were packed. In 1955, there had been 46 students to one teacher, and by 1967, there were 58 students in a class with one teacher. There were too many students and not enough teachers. But on top of that, many of the teachers themselves had only been allowed a Bantu education and were sometimes less qualified than the students they were teaching. At one point, to make numbers more even in different years, some pupils who had passed their Standard 6 examinations, that's grade 8 today, were asked to repeat the grade again. This was met with great resentment by the students and their parents and built up increased frustration with the Bantu education system. In Soweto, in 1976, only about 1 in every 5 children were able to go to junior high school. Imagine how frustrating it is if you can't get a good education, are packed like sardines in a classroom, without enough teachers or resources. Then, in 1975, there were some changes in the system. The government decided that because it was white people who were both English and Afrikaans speaking that were paying taxes, which then paid for the urban Bantu education, the students should have to learn both English and Afrikaans. Remember, they wouldn't let black people get a good education and have good jobs so that they could pay taxes too. They said that students must now learn mathematics, history and geography in Afrikaans, but could keep learning natural science, the arts and crafts subjects and agricultural science in English. Imagine having to suddenly have your maths lessons or history and geography lessons in a completely foreign language that you don't understand. The students complained, and so did the teachers. Many didn't know Afrikaans and said, "We can't teach in a language we don't know." As you can see, these two human rights were being violated: the right to be treated free and equal, and the right to have access to as high an education as you wish. The students began to plan a peaceful protest in Soweto, where they would march against having to learn half their subjects in Afrikaans. On the morning of June the 16th, 1976, students arrived at their schools as normal, but they began to hum, to sing, and stood and began to march towards Orlando Stadium, where the students from all the schools would meet together. Altogether, there were 11 columns of students marching from their different school areas to the stadium. Around 20,000 students marched that day. The protest started off peacefully, but tragically it turned violent when the police opened fire on the unarmed students. The students ran. Many were shot and injured, and some were killed. The first student to be shot that day was 15-year-old Hastings Ndlovu. Yet it is the photo of Hector Peterson that became famous and found its way onto the front pages of international newspapers. This raised alarm in the international community as they were shocked by the police brutality and the reality of the oppression of the apartheid regime. Reports say that the official number of deaths that day was 23, but it was probably much higher as police wanted to cover up what had taken place. The events of the 16th of June triggered widespread violence throughout South Africa. In the days that followed, the wider community joined in protests about the inequalities in the country. When we hear about events of the past like this, we have an emotional response. I wonder how you feel as you hear what happened that day. You may feel sad, perhaps angry, confused, mad, frustrated, surprised, incredibly upset, or horrified. It's important that we allow ourselves to feel that emotion, to think about the past, and to decide how we want to live in the future. The youth that peacefully took a stand against injustice in June 1976 started something much bigger than they imagined. Like a dominoes effect, their courage to stand up for justice had a knock-on effect as others joined the protest and the demands for change increased. Eventually, this was part of the force that led to the government realizing that things had to change. Kofi Annan, who was Secretary General of the United Nations for 9 years, said, "Young people should be at the forefront of global change and innovation. Empowered, they can be key agents for development and peace." That is what the students of 1976 were. This is what you can be, an agent of change. You can make a difference. Everything you do contributes towards justice for others or injustice. How amazing that you and I, whatever age we are, get to be part of writing the future and creating a better future. So, on Youth Day this year, there are 3 things we can do. Commemorate. This means to remember the 16th of June 1976, to remember those who lost their lives as they stood up for their human rights, and those who lost loved ones or were involved in the pain of that day and what followed. Celebrate. We celebrate that the courageous actions of those young people caused a knock-on effect and an uprising of others to stand up for their rights and for justice. This is why it is often called the Soweto Uprising. We celebrate that change did come, apartheid ended, and that everyone now legally has access to education. And cultivate. When we cultivate ground, we prepare it for growing something new. There are many in South Africa who are still in schools without enough resources or large class sizes. Many adults who received a Bantu education have not been able to get good jobs to make life better for their children. Yet there is always hope, and those of us who are courageous can stand up against injustice and do something, however big or small, to bring more justice in the future. What could you do? Perhaps donating the books you've already read, or sports kit that's too small. That could make a difference to someone else. Or maybe finding out more about our history so that you can understand the challenges that people face today and why those challenges are there. As we celebrate Youth Day this year, let us commemorate those who had incredible courage and look to be those who are courageous in the future.